This is Derek, a monster that I made for my short film, Derek, as part of the Weird Horror Film Festival in 2025. Today I'm going to be walking you through the process of how I created Derek, who compromises mainly of a couple of prop arms, a mask, and then a close-up detail hand. So I made my film on a real budget. Derek was one of the most expensive things, which was $50 all up. I used some soft foam, some press-on nails, glue, tape, and then a harder foam, which has a sort of cardboard outside. These cost me about $20 from Look Sharp. In addition, I bought this straight-haired wig, a couple of LED candles for the lights, some tissue paper, brushes, bandage strips. I also got this wig for a couple of dollars from an op shop. So I'm going to start with the mask. So first I'm figuring out the shape of the mask and where the actual eyes are going to go. That's the circle. So I'm pinning on some soft foam to start building out the structure and then sketching on the face I want for Derek. I've done a few sketches in my notebook so I know roughly what I want him to look like. Here I'm sketching out the door, which is not going to be fully articulated, but is going to be a separate piece that I add on top. Here I just clip everything into place before I finally staple it down once I decide, and the fake nails for teeth. I'm so glad I realised I could use these for fake teeth. They look so much better than anything else I could have done and came in so many different sizes, and they were super easy to work with. Here I'm just sampling the glue on the foam so I can see how it works, and then also with gluing down one of the nails. I do a lot of sampling during this process so I can kind of stay ahead on the game and figure out if things aren't working. So here I'm just cutting some detail into the nails / teeth. I really want a jagged, scary teeth kind of look. So first off, I'm setting them with foam, just using a nice little bit of hard foam as a brush here, which was so easy at getting the glue where I needed it to be. I want a nice chunky layer so that these nails can just sit in as a base so that I know where everything's going to lay. So for the gums, I am actually ripping up just pieces of napkin. I think these are burger fuel napkins that I had left over in my house. Popping some PVA on them and then sort of massaging them into the teeth as the gums and giving the teeth also something to stick to. This little bit of foam is honestly so much better than just a brush would have been because I can really get into all the crevices with the edges, and it means you're not getting dry glue in the bristles. So here's one of my finished gums, as it were. I'm just sort of checking the placement and where I want it to go. Of course, at the bottom teeth as well. So I'm going back to my sample and then cutting back some of the foam just to see that everything is still secure because I realise it's looking kind of terrible. So I go in and I trim the excess off the other gums. At this point I'm looking at the jaw and I'm thinking that it's sort of a weird shape and profile with the top of the head. So I'm just adding some additional foam to build out the shape and keep that profile a little straighter. He also definitely looks like a Muppet in this section. I find staples to be really invaluable for sticking the foam together. Just instantaneously holds it, and I knew I was going to be putting some kind of skin layer on top. So I noticed some bubbling, so I'm cutting back the foam again and just really anchoring it in place. So here I'm taking apart the LED light. I bought red ones because I thought I was going to use the red plastic as the light, but I end up not doing that. But these are such a great light up eye method without having to figure out any wiring. So here I just trace the size of the light and then cut it out of the foam. At this point I realize the light is going to need a base to sit on, which will need to be roughly pretty straight. So I stop cutting it off and just fold it down. I don't really want the eyes to look two different directions. He's definitely looking a bit Iron Giant here. So I'm cutting out those eyes again and just seeing where I can set them into the face. Little test with a wig, looking quite a lot like Momo there. And starting to come in with some of that plaster wrap, so just wetting it and then massaging it on I thought I was going to use this for the skin mostly, but later I end up changing tack. Here I'm building up those eye sockets again so that the lights have something to sit on and to make them look a little flatter. I'm just gluing little layers of foam, which I'm then covering with plaster later. This also really gives him, strong standing out eyes that I think is a real key look. I really like big creepy eyes in monsters, so this is definitely something I wanted to highlight, and I feel like I spent probably more time on the eyes than the teeth even. I've also sculpted in a little bit of a skeletal-like nose. And here I'm testing the light with some red, so I'm using some red paint as well as some nail polish, just to see what looks best against the plastic. I end up going with the red paint because it gives a pretty smooth effect, and most of the red nail polishes I had glitter in them. And I figure by doing a thick layer of smooth red paint, I can get the effect I want. I'm just painting the teeth white. So now I'm coating the eye socket in PVA glue so that I have a base to start working on, and I'm using tissue paper as the main skin. I found the plaster had a really rough effect to it, which, while nice, I was worried would look a little bit messy under the paint. Once I started coming in with the tissue paper, the look really came together. It looks very skin-like, quite wrinkly. I feel like Derek's look is very much inspired by like skeletons and mummies, sort of dry and desiccated. There's no lips, there's no nose cartilage. Here I'm building up the eye some more. I did a test with the light and it's just really not enough depth, so I'm adding an extra foam layer. And so here's with that eye build up, and I'm just adding some additional tissue paper for the gums now. I feel like I was constantly going back and forth and adding things as I was creating because this was all pretty much done on the fly. I had a basic idea of what I was doing, but it was pretty crunch time. I was surprised with how effective this was and how well it worked. The tissue paper just really seemed to melt with the PVA and just blended everything really nicely together, especially with layers of it. And so here is Derek with the base. I sort of added a bit of a bottom lip, but I end up basically painting it out later. So here he's all dry and getting ready to paint. So for the eyes, here's that red painted plastic, and I'm just securing the plastic in the eye hole again with the tissue paper PVA blend. I like the tissue paper because it's quite malleable, and I feel like if you put paint on it, it won't just immediately start to fleck off. And now I start painting. So yellow teeth, of course, to give a creepy effect. And then also red around the gum lines. I originally did kind of like a white skin color for Derek, and I realized this was totally the wrong direction. So I mix up a grey paint and then give him a grey base and come in with some black shading for the hair as well. This is just the initial base layer of paint before I start coming in and adding these details like darker reddy blood around the gums. I'm also realizing as the light's coming down and that I'm going to be shooting this at night that I need to be playing a lot more with highlight and shadows. So my shadows, I just start using black paint, and my highlights just white paint on top of the grey that sort of blends in. I'm going back and forth between the eyes and the mouth just to give enough time for things to start drying, but also I like to start blending them in, adding some browning to the teeth, some shadow around the mouth as well. High highlights and low shadows is basically what I'm thinking. Basically all of this paintwork is lost in the original film anyway. He's covered in hair, but it still does something. I also go in and do some details around the eye, and then I sort of have a look at it under some lights with the red behind the eyes. So something I decided to give more of a red look is to use the red nail polish I like the most on the actual LED bulb. So it was casting a red light and then it had red over the top. There's a little test there you can see with the colour. And now I'm cutting out the eye hole and getting ready to set in that light. So it's practicing with the position, seeing how it looks. You can see the detail in the eye there. I sort of like how the bright LED shows up like a little pupil as well. So I'm using more pieces of that foam to build up the eye area so that the light sits flat. It's a lot of placing, checking, because I really didn't want him to have wonky sort of Persian cat eyes. I had some orange gaffer tape, which I used to doubly secure things, just a little bit better than the brown tape. Just constantly building things up, taping it down, checking it, making sure that everything's relatively aligned and also that I can still access the switch to turn the lights on. It was pretty finicky, and in the end, honestly, I needn't have fussed so much because after the first couple of takes, one of Eric's eyes ran out of batteries. You can't really tell in the film, or at least I hope, but yeah, that was a real shame. So as another detail, I decided to start adding a beard. I have that curly haired wig and I just take one weft out of it and staple it along the edge of the jawline. I realise he just needs a little more detail and I don't want the mask to be a harsh end. And next is the arms. So I start by tracing around my hand. I'll then sketch it to build it out later, but I want to roughly start from something the size of my own hand. This is me sketching the shape of Derek's actual hand. I build separate arms and a close-up hand for the detail shots, the arms for the wide stuff. I know they can be a little rougher and less detailed. So now I'm just cutting out the palm, and now doing the same with the fingers, sketching out how long I want them to be, where the knuckles are going to sit in relation to my own. I want the fingers to be quite long and pointed and scary looking. As you can see, they're much longer than my own. And taking a look at where those fake nails are going at the end. So the idea I had was to cut every piece out of the thick foam board and then cover it in the soft foam. You can see in the background all of the joint pieces laid out. I do these foam segments for all three of the hands I end up making, but I don't have that thicker inner foam for just these mock hands that are on the arms. And here's another sort of little progress. You can see where I am with everything else in relation to this. So I figure I need the arms to be able to fit my hand in the wrist if I'm going to be able to hold them. So I measure them out and then make tape the same size so that I can check where everything goes and the width it needs to be. I find my elbow and my hand have pretty similar circumferences. And here's a bit of my sketchbook of Derek, and you can see the concept for the arm is that it's going to be segmented. And I also have a list of all of the things I need to do to finish him up. So I cut this out of that hard foam board and I'm just scoring it so that it hasn't been cut all the way through and I can turn it round. Here I'm just taping up the arm and then I can trial the fit of it. I do want them to be much longer than my own arm. I was going to be wearing the costume as well as Finn, who stars in the film, and I knew that I was just slightly bigger than Finn, and so whatever I made for me would fit for her. So here I added many more scoring marks, which just allows the arm to be a lot rounder. And here are all of the fingers, so I just taped them all up. And then I have the base for the hand, which I taped newsprint to that I just had in my house. Sorry this didn't have more to it, but you can see the soft hands versus the close-up hand, which is a little more rigid. I sort of was starting to run out of time and realizing I needed to finish, so I stopped videoing as many clips, but honestly I just tape everything together. So I knew Derek's arms were mostly going to be seen from the back, so I didn't worry about making the wrist totally tight with the arm. And just the old glue and tissue paper for the skin. I probably could have painted directly onto the tape, but I was worried it would flake off and then I would have to deal with that while we were shooting. So the tissue paper base I think was really nice for the paint. It's a little bit flexible, it's a little bit more matte as well. So now I'm just covering the whole arm in PVA, and then I'm going to lay tissue sheets the whole way down as well. Initially I wanted to add a lot more detail into the arm, but time was running out. I was starting to realise that we wouldn't actually see it on film. I didn't want to add unnecessary detail to the stuff that we were only going to be seeing from far away. I painted them up grey, again really rough, and then for a final touch painted on some PVA glue and stuck on some little curly hairs to give him some arm hair. And finally the detail hand for close-ups. So I have all those finger pieces that you've seen in the previous section, and then I'm threading them together with string to sort of create the articulation. I cover this with tape. This is just a sort of prototype test, and I find it'll still move roughly as I want, so I'm pretty happy with this. So the tips of the fingers are just layers of the foam board, sort of shaped how I want, and then I go about taping everything together. I initially wanted a more complex articulation method, but this was just what I could figure out on the fly, and it worked for my needs. This funny plastic needle I have, I think is from a Christmas cracker the previous year. I hung on to it because I thought it was kind of funny, but it ended up being the perfect tool for this. If you don't happen to have a random plastic Christmas cracker needle, then you can probably use just a big upholstery needle from a craft store will work. So I'm using this to puncture through the foam and then thread through the string. The string I already had. Get enough articulation that I like, and then I knot off the ends. So here I've got all my little finger pieces strung on. So I come back to my tester and I'm trying out the skin covering. I'm not sure if by this point I'd done it on the mask yet or not, but I was trying out the look of the tissue paper skin. I'm going to say I haven't figured it out because this is not the refined application method that I originally end up doing and ends up going super quick on the mask. So here I'm just putting on some tape for the articulation so that I know where I want it to end, and then I am taping up the joints. I know from my test that by doing this there's still enough flexibility. I don't need full articulation, I just need a little bit of movement to sell that it's a hand in the film. And here is a little look at the size of the hand, especially compared to my own. It's definitely much bigger. Again, all my little phalanges. And you've already seen this, but taping up the newsprint to use as padding for the hand. In an ideal world, I would have had string up the back, behaving like tendons and being able to pull the finger straight or let it curl over, but this is what I had and it totally worked for what I needed. Just taping down those excess bits of string. At this point I realised the thumb is in kind of a weird place. When you make a claw with your hand, your thumb ends up more horizontally, so I'm just cutting it down and then attaching it in a more appealing way. The brown tape helped me move house later this year, but was also fantastic for this. Here I'm just cutting off the excess string for the hands that I no longer need. So the string gives me a really good idea that I should build in some tendon looking things to the hand, the same as when you make a claw with your actual hand. So I start building these up as a base before I cover it in the full skin. I really like this effect on the hand. It's probably my favourite part about it. And now I'm covering it entirely with the skin. There was a lot of watching glue dry while I was making this. So for some additional details, I add little wrinkled bits of tissue paper to the knuckles. It'll save me painting it in later, and also just like adds a little bit of visual interest. As you can see, I keep clenching my hand as a point of reference. Loving the look of this so far. Really reminds me of Eddie from Iron Maiden. And now the paint job. So I just cover it all in that same skin grey that I used for the face, and then start coming in with the shadows and highlights again. I always start too mild, and I'm like, no, I need to come in with black. This is going to be shot at night. I need black for shadows, and then like very pale whitish grey for the highlights. And now getting Derek ready for his manicure. So I'm just cutting these coffin shaped nails into a pointier nail. And getting some Gorilla Glue ready, which I already had at home. I used these nails instead of the teeth ones because these were slightly longer and already had the coloured base. When I was in the store, it seemed to make sense. So now I'm coming in with a little bit of paint detailing for the nails. I sort of want to dirty them up, make them look a bit yucky and scungy. Again, shadow and highlight, sort of blending them in. There's probably way too much speed painting in this video, but sort of helpful to see. And I'm using a dry brush for the texture here. And the finished painted hand. So this is me very excited about how everything is going, and the checklist is all but done. So as a touch, I'm just covering the hand in the PVA, and then I'll be sticking some more hair to the back of it, like the arms. And there we have it. That is Derek. He's basically a mask, 2 arms, a detail hand, and the rest is hair and costume. So I really love how Derek looks here. I was so stoked with what I'd made in only a few days.
Fucking fantastic.
You can see that his eyelight has disappeared. The teeth detail is looking really good in moments where you can't see the inside of the mask. One thing I do on the day, which I don't show in this video, is that I sew some thread into the fingers so that I can pull it to articulate it. I didn't have fishing line, but I just chose a pale coloured thread, and you'll see how that looked when I was testing it versus how it looked on the day at the end. And here you can see the painted detail of the hand, which I really like. Honestly, I think it's all about having a go, and especially if you film in the dark, you can get away with so much. The main shortcoming of this costume was that I was too short and didn't bring tall enough shoes to be able to sell this shot. It was about 4 AM when we were recording this, and honestly we were just ready to get it over with, but I made do. So thank you so much for checking out the video. I hope to see you soon at the Weird Horror Film Fest. Check us out at weirdhorrorfilmfest.com for other past entries into the film festival and to register for 2026 to make your own. I will see you there.